All right, so we're going to get started today. And today we're actually shifting a bit from what we've been doing. Obviously, we're working on AutoCAD, then we went into Illustrator. And today we're going to move on into SketchUp. And SketchUp is one of those programs that's kind of out there that many of you have probably experienced before. You've probably used it on your own, maybe used it in 120. So I don't have too much in terms of teaching you technique because a lot of the technique of SketchUp you've picked up already. So I don't want to repeat myself. However, one of the biggest challenges with SketchUp is that SketchUp models always look like SketchUp models. And getting high quality output from SketchUp is difficult. And I want to focus most of what we're doing going forward on how do we create good quality output from SketchUp. So today we're actually going to be just building. But then when we move forward, we're going to spend a lot more time with collaging and Photoshop and how do we make all of these things kind of come together and coalesce into a nice end product. We will do a little bit of Photoshop today, and I'll show you that process just so you can get your feet wet in it. This is, as we go forward into the next assignment, you're going to be modeling that same thing that you did in AutoCAD, and we're going to bring that into SketchUp in 3D. And you'll learn a lot in the process, and you'll probably want to change things, and that's completely normal. So that'll be next week. We'll start on that. But for today, we're going to concentrate just on some basics in SketchUp and kind of getting the ball rolling. For those of you that have never touched SketchUp, I'm pretty confident that you'll pick it up awfully quickly. So give me a second to share my screen here, and we'll get started. All right, just a quick organization. Hold on. All right, so for exercise 123, for what we're working on today, you're going to be modeling this Francis Ching cube house, which is right here. It's built on a 4-foot by 4-foot module or subdivisions thereof. So you have a 4-foot by 4-foot square, you have or cube, you have a 2-foot by 2-foot cube, and you have a few other sizes, like this is a 1 by 4. These little ones are 1-foot by 1-foot cubes, etc. So we're going to go through this process of how you would build this. Now, a couple things. One, this is designed for you to work on it for about 2 hours completely. So if you don't finish the full cube house, that's okay. Notice also that the side and back of the cube house don't have any detail at all. So that certainly saves you a little bit of time as well. If you want to embellish it or tweak it or change it to be more of your own design, there's nothing wrong with that either. So you can, of course, kind of adjust it. In part 3, that's when we're going to be moving it into Photoshop. And so I'll definitely walk through that part in a little bit more detail for you. This will be a little bit repetitive because we'll repeat this process going forward. But I wanted to kind of introduce what we were doing to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up SketchUp. I'm using the remote desktop, which is going to allow me access to SketchUp Pro. So if we go here to SketchUp 2021, I can choose SketchUp Pro 2021. We'll go ahead and open that. There is a free version of SketchUp that's available through the web that you can use. There is also a $50 student license if you want to use the SketchUp Pro student license. Why did it not open? There we go. So you can choose to buy it. It's not required. I would recommend just using the remote desktop. You've worked in AutoCAD primarily. That's easy. There are a couple differences between the web version of SketchUp and the SketchUp Pro, namely in how the exports happen. Modeling with it is a little bit harder, I think, but I've had students in the past who've used the web version the whole time and been fine with it. So it's certainly something that you can decide to do. So when we first open up SketchUp, we'll get this Welcome to SketchUp screen, and it's going to ask us to create a new model. We want to use the architectural inches template. So I'll click on that. And it will go ahead and it will open up a brand new SketchUp for me. So SketchUp, when it opens, always includes a figure for scale. And the first thing I always do when I open SketchUp is delete the figure. So I've selected her. I'm going to right click and click erase so that she goes away. You don't have to, you can leave the figure in there, but it's just kind of a quirk of SketchUp that they do. Okay, so in terms of SketchUp, we have, and this is specifically SketchUp Pro, we have our typical file menu structure running across the top, and we have a small tool set that runs across the top here. There is a larger tool set. If we go to, let's see, where is it? They move these things around on me. Hold on. View toolbars. I can check the large tool set. There it is. And that gives us more tools, more easily accessible tools. So I generally enable that. And if I were working on my own computer, I would just have that enabled permanently. But it gives you a few more options. Basically, the difference is that you're hiding tools underneath these little arrows as opposed to just having access to them. It's a personal preference. So let's talk about actually creating something in SketchUp. So if I were to pick the rectangle tool, for example, when I go to click on the rectangle tool, you can see that I can start to draw a rectangle. There is a point at which I will get a diagonal dotted line, and you see that it says golden section. That's a ratio. There should also be a dotted line for a square. Of course, I don't appear to be able to get that. Now, sometimes you want to be able to actually put a distinct value in for your shape. And if you want to do that, the bottom of my window isn't showing. So hold on a second. Let me, there we go. Now it's fitting and I can see the bottom right corner here. We go back to the rectangle and I start to draw. And when I draw, you see that down in the lower right corner, it says dimensions. And so right now it's 2'4" and 7/16 by 4'2" and 11/16. I can actually type, just like AutoCAD, I could type in a value. So I could type in 4', 4', and hit return. And that will build a rectangle that's 4 feet by 4 feet. Now it's kind of like using relative coordinates. So no matter where I am, let's say I started the rectangle tool over here. When I go to start to draw, if I type 4 feet, 4 feet and hit enter, it's still going to create a 4 foot by 4 foot rectangle. Now I want to point something out. The way that SketchUp's view works, the closer you are to the center of the screen, the more in proportion your shapes will be. So this is a 4 foot by 4 foot rectangle. This over here doesn't look like 4 feet at all, right? It looks like about 4 feet by 2 feet. There's a distortion that happens in SketchUp when you get to the edges of the window. So if I were to orbit, and I can do that by either choosing the orbit tool, this one right here, or I can press down and hold the middle mouse button. As I orbit, you can see that actually it is 4 foot by 4 foot. The more I zoom out, or if I were to scroll wheel and move this back in, suddenly that starts to become a square. So I like to point that out early on in SketchUp because sometimes what you see isn't exactly what's happening. So this is the same as this. It's just the view that's changing it. So let's make this a 3D object. And I can do that by using the push pull tool, which is right here. And I can simply pull up on my object to create some height. And so I could go ahead and again, while I'm still holding the mouse button, I could type 4 feet and then enter, and it'll set my height at 4 feet. Same thing with this object, right? I can click and hold and drag up to create this height, and then I can type in 4 feet. I have not let go of the mouse yet until after I press the enter key. And so I've created these two cubes. Now, one of the challenges with SketchUp is that when objects join together, or when they come together and touch, so let me move this object so that these two touch, they kind of become fused. So now if I go to move that object, they stay attached. So sometimes when you're building, it's more helpful, I'm going to back up here, Control Z, to keep these as separate little building blocks and not have them connect together. And I can do that by grouping them. So if I were to select my object here, I can right click and say group or make group. There we go. Likewise, I can select this object, right click and select make group. And now, well, one, it's much easier when I click on them because I can move the whole object. But if I were to move that object, I'm using the move tool here. When they come together, if I move them again, they'll stay separate. So creating groups initially is a really good strategy. So what I've done is I've created a 4 foot by 4 foot cube. Actually, I've created 2 of them. And now I'm going to start to build out this, sorry, wrong window here, this house. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cubes in a row. So let me jump back to SketchUp, and I need to copy these. Okay, so when I go to copy them, I have a couple options. I can go to Edit, and then I can go to Copy. And I can take this. Oops, sorry, I have to go to Paste. Edit, Paste. And there's my next one. I could use keyboard shortcuts. I can use Control V to paste and get my next one, etc. The other option would be to just use the Move tool. And with the Move tool, before I actually choose where to move from, I can hold down the Control key. Maybe it's, sorry, it's the Alt key. And when I click, it will make a copy for me. Oops. Always good when this. Try it one more time. No. Sorry, my mistake. It was the Control key. If I press the Control key, see how I get that little plus next to the Move tool? That means I'm going to be creating copies. So we can come here and we can continue making copies until we have a total of 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and one more gets us to 8. Now I could take this whole section, now that I have 8, and I could copy that whole thing. So I can again use the Move tool. I could press the Control key. I get the little plus sign, and then I can move going backwards to create going 8 going in this way. Notice that I'm always picking these points as I do this so that they're snapping to one another. One of the problems that occurs in SketchUp is when objects aren't really touching. They're just close. So you want to make sure you're using these snaps. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, and one more would be 8. So I'm building out that bottom. There's my first set. Now, let's go back and look. I have a little piece that pops out here in the front. So let's go ahead and copy to that piece. So I'm going to select this cube. I'm going to hold down Shift and select that cube. And then once again, I'm going to go to my Move tool, press the Control key so that I can copy, and I'll move this forward like that. Now, as we look at these two, they're actually set on diagonals. So at this point, it's time to make these something that we can work with and modify. So I will right click on this and I will choose Explode. And when I do that, this becomes individual surfaces again. I'll take this object, I'll right click and I'll explode that. And now we can go in and make some modifications. So I'll use the line tool to draw a line from here to there. And I'll draw a line from here to there. And so one of the things that happens in SketchUp is that whenever you take a surface and you draw a line on top of that surface, it divides that surface into 2 pieces. So I could actually take this piece and delete it now. So I'll right click and choose Erase. If you're on a Windows computer, you can just press the Delete key. Macs through Zoom, or excuse me, through the remote desktop have trouble with the Delete key. So I end up right clicking to erase. Likewise, I could right click to erase there. I could right click to erase here. Right click to erase. Right click to erase. Now, I have the upper surface, but I don't have a surface that's that diagonal yet because I haven't drawn this diagonal line. So when I draw that diagonal line, not only is it going to separate the bottom surface into 2 pieces, but it's also going to fill in the missing surface in between. So I can draw my line right there, and that's going to fill that in. Then I can come back and select this piece and delete it. And select this piece and delete it. I can also get rid of these lines. So I've selected them. I'll right click and say erase. And sometimes it's easier if I orbit so that I can look kind of down on my object. when I make these selections. So let me select those. I'll right click and say erase. I will select these. I'll right click and I'll say erase. Now, at this end, we had a little bit of a ramp that needed to appear. And it was going down by 3. So, for example, if I drew a line from there to there, right, I can start to see what this lamp is, or this ramp is doing. But each of these hasn't been exploded yet, so they're not dividing. So if I take each of these, I'll hold down Shift to select all 3 at once, right click and say explode, you'll see that that surface has been divided, and I can go in and I can delete these surfaces. Likewise, I need to draw a line from here down to that spot. That creates the slope. I need to divide these. And I'm struggling to reach that point, so I may need to orbit. Again, that's middle mouse button, like the scroll wheel. And then I can go in and I can delete these other pieces that are in my way. So let's, I'm gonna hold down Shift so I can do more of these at once. We'll right click and we'll say erase. So again, I'm holding down Shift. And I think I have them all. We'll right click and we'll say erase. And now I have that ramp coming down. So the key is that I'm not exploding these cubes until I'm ready to explode those cubes. So let's jump over, take another look at the piece here. If we go back to, I start to make this little front. So in that, let me go, let's go ahead and start to build that up. Now to build that up, I really need smaller pieces. I need 2 foot by 2 foot cubes. So I would go ahead and make a 2 foot cube. So I'll use the rectangle. We'll start to draw. I'll type 2 apostrophe comma 2 apostrophe to create that first 2 foot by 2 foot cube. I'll use the push pull tool and come up by 2 feet. Then I'll select it before I move it, right click and say make group. Then we can go ahead and move it. So I'll use the move tool. And this was right there. I'm going to press the control key so that with the move tool selected, I can move and make copies. And then let's go ahead and select both of these at once. And we'll go back to the move tool, press the control key. And now I can copy these vertically. Now, I don't remember how high that was. So we'll come back here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wait, 1, 2, 4, 5. The 5th one goes across. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. So then I need a shape that's in between. And this is a larger shape. So I could actually draw a rectangle there and then use the push-pull tool to pull that one up to create that part of the door. Now, if we look at it, looks like we have these 2 foot by 2 foot cubes heading back. So we can come back here and we can select these 2 foot cubes. Move tool, I press and release the control key. And you can see that I'm starting to build that up. I believe that I need a few more on top here. So let's take these 3 and these 3. And let's copy them. The move tool, press and release the control key. And that may be enough. I need one more in the front here. So let me take these two. Let's go to the move tool, press the control key. I'm going to copy those into the front. Now, if we look at this, I've got a little sloping roof going on here. And 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's only 3. All right, so let's create that next. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So it's going to be, as I start to draw it, a diagonal that goes right there. Right? Likewise, if I orbit, I can create the diagonal right there. I could draw a line across. And when I do that, you see that it starts to fill in where that roof would be. So these cubes, well, these are extras, so we could delete those altogether. But I'm going to need to trim off all of those cubes. So once again, I'll take each of these cubes and I'll explode them. I'll right click and choose explode. And then I'm going to orbit and make my selections like this, so that I can delete the upper part of each of these cubes. Yep. There we go. So I've created that sloping roof. Now, on this sloping roof, if you look at it, it's divided up into little 1-foot pieces. So let's come back to SketchUp. And we need to divide this roof up. So you'll see that I can snap to the midpoint right here and make that line. I can snap to the midpoint and make that line. Now, this one, I can only snap to that midpoint because I don't have a midpoint. However, once I draw that line, I'll be able to come back and snap to this midpoint. There we go. And there we go. To clean this up, I can delete these extra little line segments. Let me hold down Shift. And let me right click and say erase. Nope, well, it didn't delete all the way. All right, well, I have that. Now I can continue building backwards. However, I don't want you to have to sit here and watch me draw this whole shape. So I'm going to concentrate on one more thing. That's a set of tools that you're going to need. And then we'll jump to the end. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on the door that's in here. So we have a little door here. And so I need to draw that shape. Let me jump back to SketchUp. Come on. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and draw a line that goes across right here. And then I need another line that's up at the top. So this may be something where you have to orbit around to kind of see. Right? I'm going to come up and draw a line that goes across right there and a line that goes down right here. When I do that, it fills in where that door would be. I'm not overly concerned with what the inside of this building looks like because we're not showing the inside, we're only showing the outside, but there is where that door would be. Now the door has a little bit of detail on it. If we look at this, it has like a little frame or whatever that goes around it. So I want to show you how you could do that. Now, again, we're working on this for a set amount of time. I don't want you working longer than 2 hours on this project. So if you don't get there, you don't get there. However, if we wanted to add some depth to this door, we can use the offset tool in SketchUp, which is right here. So it says offset. And the offset tool works a little bit differently than it does in AutoCAD, in that we're looking at a surface and we're going to offset the edges of a surface. So if I click the tool and I come to this surface and I click, it's going to take the edge or the border of that surface and let me offset it. So let's say I offset it, I don't know, 2 inches. Now I have a frame that goes around. Now I can add detail by using the push-pull tool. So I can come over here and use the push-pull tool, and then I can actually push this back to create some depth. So I could say, let's go back by 1 inch. And now it looks like I have a door with a little piece of glass in it. We're not going to talk about materials today, so I'm not worried about applying a material there. I'm just showing you how I could go about creating that shape. Same thing with any one of these, right? I could take these roof sections and I could add some depth to any one of those roof sections if I wanted to, right? So I could add some thickness to it. I could say, let's make that 2 inches thick, and then all of these could be a little bit thicker. Come on. And so a lot of times this is how SketchUp works, where we're adding progressive layers of detail. So let me, oops. Make that. Just little bits of detail. So that's not required by any means, but it's just something that you can kind of work through in SketchUp. So up in the upper windows, up in here, you're going to be doing those offsets again. All right. So like I said, I don't want you to sit here and watch me model the whole building. I think you guys can figure it out. Remember, as much as you can, keep the groups together until you need to explode them. Once you're done with this object, it's going to look something like this, where we've actually modeled out the rest of the shape. Notice that if I orbit this around to the backside, there's really nothing going on. Likewise, if I come back here, there's nothing there. So we're far more concerned with what's happening on the front side than we are with what's happening on the back side. Hold on a second. All right, so now that we have this shape, we want to think about how do we output the shape and make it look good, okay? So this is where we're going to get into some of the options over here. And I do have some written out tutorials that will help you through this process. So if you come down here, I have some SketchUp 4.4, for examples, styles for Photoshop. We're going to be following this. Let me just open it in a new tab so you can see it. Right, this will walk you through the step-by-step exactly what I'm doing here. But the idea is that we're going to, if I can get back to my SketchUp, we're going to start with a very basic line drawing. And so I want to establish a view. And in SketchUp, these are called scenes. So I want to get something that I like. Let's say it's like that. Maybe I want to get down at eye level and look up at my building. Again, it's just kind of a matter of preference. But let's say it's there and I like it. I'm going to open on the right side here under default tray. I'm going to open the scenes. And I'm going to choose this plus sign to add a scene. And when I add a scene, it's now called scene 4. I could actually close this instructor, rename scene, and we could call this, I don't know, perspective. Now it's important to save this because we want to be able to come back to it. So if I accidentally move the view, if I double click on this, it'll bring me back to that same view over and over again. And when we start to do outputs, we want to make sure that we're outputting the exact same view every time. Okay, so I have the scene saved. Now I'm going to open up the styles window. And so depending on how you model, you may have a style that looks like this by default. You may have a style that looks more like this by default. And these are all default styles. We want to get something that's as close to just plain lines as we can get. So if we continue under styles, if we select the default styles right here, if you come over, there's one that's called hidden line style. And when we pick the hidden line style, it's kind of as plain as can be. And that's really what we're looking for. Now, currently the shadows are shown. I want to turn those off. So I'm going to go up to View, and I'm going to uncheck Shadows. I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to uncheck Axes. I'll go to View. I'll uncheck Guides. I actually don't have any guides. And now what we're looking at is basically a plain black and white line drawing. No embellishment at all. This is the first one that I want to export. So to export it, I'm going to go up to File and then Export. Oops, come on. And I'm going to choose 2D graphic. And this 2D graphic is going to be a JPEG. I want to look at my options. So let me click on my options button here. And by default, it's checked for use view size. I actually don't want to use the view size. I want it to be bigger. And we would determine this by how big we want this drawing to be if it was going on a wall. So you want to think about 300 pixels per inch and how big your drawing would be. So if it was going to be 10 inches, you'd want 3,000 pixels. I believe that SketchUp does max out at 10,000. So that's the biggest that we can export. For our purposes, I'm going to go ahead and go with 3,000. So I type in 3,000 for width. I'll go ahead and say OK. Now, this Francis Ching Cube House, let's do, this would be spring of 2022. And I'm going to add an underscore lines to this. And then I want to make sure it goes into my folder. Let's get a spring of 2022. All right, and we'll go ahead and we'll save this, and I'll choose export. Perfect. So that's my first one. Now the next piece would be to do an export that includes the shadows. So the shadows, if I open the shadows drawer on the right here, we can actually choose a specific date or time for the shadows. So let me go to View, Shadows, and then I would move the time to get a set of shadows that looks good. Obviously, picking a set of shadows where your whole building is in the shadow might not be the best. So you're going to find something where you kind of like the shadows, right? And you can flip it around. You can decide where you want those shadows to be. Or if you wanted it at a specific date and time, you could set it for that specific date and time. So there it is. I have my shadows set up. However, I really don't want to see all of those lines. So I'm going to go back to my styles. I'm going to go to Edit. And I'm going to uncheck edges. And you see that when I uncheck edges, I end up with pretty much just the shadows, which is ideal for export. So again, I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this is going to be just the shadows, if I can type. And I'll choose Export. We can turn those edges back once. There it is. I'm going to turn off the shadows. So I'll go to View, and then I'll turn off the shadows. Now, in my tutorial, I say if you have guides or if you use guides, you can do an export with guides. One of the other things that I have a tendency to do is I turn on hidden geometry. Oh, that didn't change anything. Let me do hidden objects. No. No, maybe I didn't have either of those. So let me turn those back off. And this is one of those, if you're not seeing anything, you may not get a perfect export. So I don't have those, I didn't have options for those. However, if I come back to my styles and I go to Edit, there is an option for an Xray style. And the Xray just gives us a little more depth for all of these cubes. I don't know that this is necessarily helpful for our export, but I'm going to go ahead and export it anyway. We can choose to use it or not use it. So I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. We'll call this Xray. Come on. There we go. Now I've exported that one. All right, so let's go back to our select styles here. And these are all, again, the default styles. However, there are some that are more attractive. So we can come down here and we can choose, say, sketchy edges. And with the sketchy edges, you can play around with some of these other styles. So here is one that's called fine liner, for example. The one that I like is one that's called pen gray, and I have to find it. Pen gray, there we go. It's just a little bit sketchy. I find this one to work out pretty nicely. So we go to File and then Export, 2D Graphic. And this is going to be the pen version. And I'll export. The other one that sometimes looks nice, it actually doesn't look very good in SketchUp. However, when you do the export, it ends up looking pretty good, is this one. It's called Airbrush with Endpoints. I'll go to File and then Export 2D Graphic. And that's just something that I've discovered having done this for a long time, is that this one tends to look nice. So I'll call it Airbrush and then choose Export. And feel free, you can look around at many of the other examples. There's a style builder competition winners. So you can look at some of the other, sketchy styles or whatever, depending, right? And maybe there's a particular style that you like, and you can export that style as well. So now that all of those have been exported, remember, I haven't moved the view. It's always the same scene. I'm looking at it identically. Now that I have all those exports, I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. So we've done post-processing so far in Illustrator. We've done post-processing work in InDesign. Today, we're going to move into doing some post-processing work in Photoshop. So give it just a second to load here. All right, and let's open that first one. So I'm going to go to Open here. And we need to open up the lines drawing. That was our base for this whole thing. And there's our base lines drawn. Now I want to bring in all of the other options. So I'll go to File and then Place, and I'll use Place Embedded. I don't need to link these. They can all join together here. And I'm going to bring in each one. So let me bring in the shadows, for example. I'll choose Place. And see, the nice thing is because I exported everything in the same size with the same view, everything's going to line up. I'll go to File and then, sorry, I have to commit to it. Let me check that box. I'll go to File and then Place Embedded. And we'll bring in the next one. I did shadows. Let me bring in Xray. There it is. I'll confirm. File, Place Embedded. And what did I have? The next one was the pen. Confirm. File, Place Embedded. And the last one was the airbrush. And I'll confirm. Now, all of these line up with each other. And if you remember back to the blending modes, if I were to take the background and then turn on the shadows, if I take the shadows layer and I change the blending mode from normal to multiply, it's going to shine the shadows through the building. Likewise, if I took this next layer here, the Xray, and I went to blending mode and chose multiply, it's going to shine that through. The pen gray, same thing. Blending mode set to multiply. And the last one would be the airbrush. And we'll set that one to multiply as well. And so already this looks very, very different than what we've seen in SketchUp from an export standpoint. So let's continue with Photoshop. Now, what I have is I have a very fine level of control with what's showing and how much it's showing. So for example, to me, the X-ray right now is too much. So I can select the X-ray and I can change the opacity of the X-ray down so that it's not showing nearly as much. It's just a little bit. It's faint, almost as if they were construction lines from the drawing. So they're not overpowering the drawing anymore. Likewise, with the shadows, right? I could choose how much I wanted the shadows, how dark I wanted to be the shadows. So I can modify those. I could also do a blending mode on the shadows to selectively darken certain shadows. So if I wanted this in here to be darker, right? I could create a new layer using dodge and burn. So let me go to layer, new layer, way back to the beginning of class, dodge and burn. Remember, we're going to use a blending mode of overlay, filling with a neutral 50% gray. There it is. I only want it to apply to the layer below it. So I'll press Control Alt G. Whoops, that was not correct. Sorry about that. So helpful. Let me hold on. I can get to it by right-clicking and choosing Create Clipping Mask on the layer. Now it's applying there. I can use the paintbrush tool, or excuse me, the dodge and burn tool, which is hiding from me. There we go. Let's do the burn tool. Let's make that brush bigger. I'm going to hit the bracket key, make that a little bit bigger. I want to make sure that my hardness is set to 0, so it's a nice soft. And then I can darken the center of this shadow just a little bit. Right, and I could come over here. Let's make that brush a little bit smaller, and we could darken up that part of the shadow. And so the point here is that I just have some finer control over how these shadows are applied. So there it is, before and after. And again, just finer control. The airbrush and the pen gray, we can see what they look like with and without. To me, they add just a little bit of style to it. The pen gray actually isn't adding too much. I'm going to leave that one off, I think. But the airbrush is nice. The other option would be to just have the pen gray on. Just depends on the look that you're going for. Okay, so once you have this set, we're going to export this as a JPEG, and this is what you will turn in for your exercise 123. So it's the photoshopped version. So budget your time so that you have enough time at the end to create the Photoshop. So if you're not quite done with the Francis Ching Cube House, no worries. Remember, this is set for a 2-hour trajectory. Do a little bit of this post-processing. We're going to save it. So we'll go to File and then Export as. We can do it as a PNG, that's fine. Click on Export, and I want it to go in my folder right here. And this is, let's call it Final. And I'll click Save. And that gives me that JPEG. I can also save the Photoshop file. If I go to File and then Save, and this will save the Photoshop file. I'm going to save it also in my OneDrive here. And we'll click Save. And that would let me come back into Photoshop and adjust it again. So the keys here are that when I do all of the exports from SketchUp, I'm not moving the view at all. Because if I move the view, they're not going to line up again. So I want to make sure I'm always set in that same view doing the export. And that also means that you don't want to suddenly make the, close the default tray, because that's going to move or shift the view over. So once you have it set, you want to make sure that you maintain the window size. Everything stays the same. Let me bring back that default tray there, because that's how we're going to ensure that everything lines up with itself over and over. If you do an export for one of these style builders, there's no harm in doing that. It's just going to be one more layer in Photoshop that you can choose how much you want to show or not show. Okay, so I know I'm a little bit ahead today in terms of time, but I will go ahead and let you go. If anybody has any questions, of course, I'll be here and I'm happy to answer them. Likewise, we'll have our standard check-ins just like we had on Monday. I suspect some of you will still have some ongoing AutoCAD questions. So don't, even though we've moved into SketchUp officially today, don't be afraid to continue to ask those AutoCAD questions. So before I let you go, does anybody have any specific questions? Or if not, I'll let you go.